started. We're on Lamed Beis of
Yeah.
32A1, and we're continuing. We're going to do a little bit along the way. We're going to literally read directly from the art scroll on the bottom along the way, which really is just explaining some Rashis, but they do a phenomenal job on it, and it just makes life a lot easier. All right, so here we go. We're up to Tanu Rabbanon 32A1 left column. Tanu Rabbanon. We're continuing. There is on Yom Kippur. There are 5 times the Kohen Gadol goes to the mikvah, and 10 kiddushos. 10 times he washes his hands and his feet. Tanu Rabbanon. The pasuk says, "Uva," after he finishes the whole avodah on Yom Kippur, "Uva Aaron el oil moyeh," and Aaron should come to the oil moyeh, the tent of meeting. So, right to Gemara, where is he coming? The day is over. The job's done. The avodah is done on Yom Kippur. Eino ba elo lohitzis hakapes hamachta. He's only coming to remove the ladle and the coal pan, which he had left back in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. If you remember, he had this difficult task of putting the pan in his mouth and holding the Keteris in his hands, and he had to bring it into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, one of the hardest jobs in the Beis HaMikdash. And so in the burning coals in the pan, he would put the Keteris and he would burn them in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Now, obviously, everything is hot, so he can't wait until it cools off, as the Gemara is going to go say it later on, because otherwise he'd have to wait an extra hour or two in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. People would get frightened that he wasn't coming out. So obviously he came out and continued doing the avodas on the outside, meaning a lot more changes of clothing, which means that a lot more tevilos and washing of the hands. And that's what the Gemara here is going to talk about. Because you couldn't wait for it to, you had to go back after it cooled off. Then at the end, he would come back and get it. So it says like this: what's the last thing he did? To go back and take the frying pan and the coal pan, and which he had left in the Holy of Holies. And the entire Parsha of Yom Kippur is said in its chronological order, Chutz mi pasuk zu, except for this pasuk. Take a look at number 7 in the art scroll. Number 7 in the art scroll. The actual chronological order of Yom Kippur is exactly as it says over here. The morning, the Talmud shel boiker, which he always did in his 8 begadim, like he did every day of the year, in the golden vestments, and some of the Muslims. Then he would do the special Yom Kippur service, consisting of the Kohen Gadol's bull and chatos, and their blood applications, and the Keteris. This was all done with the white begadim, the special white begadim that he wore on Yom Kippur, because these were avodas that were specific to Yom Kippur. And obviously they would send the other goat to Azazel. Then there was the ram, the oil offering of the Kohen Gadol and the people. This was back in the golden begadim, the big day zov that he wore all year long. Then you had the pasuk mentioned the removal of the ladle and the coal pan with the white begadim from the Kodesh HaKadoshim. And then the remaining musafs and afternoon Talmud, the Talmud shel beinu abayim, the incense burning and the lighting of the menorahs. Again with the golden begadim, because it was in the regular heichal. Now says the art scroll, which is really Rashi. And what the Gemara said, although the number C, the ram's offerings were offered before the removal of the ladle and coal, the removal service is mentioned first in the pasuk, while the ram offerings are mentioned in the following pasuk. So this C and D are reversed in the pasuk. D is mentioned before the oil offering of the Kohen Gadol and the people with the gold begadim. So D is mentioned before C in the pasuk, even though becomes before D. Okay, I hope that makes sense. So the pasuk is out of order when it comes to talking about the removal of the pans, the fire pans from the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So pray to Gemara, my Tama, plus Epis. What is the reason that you're saying that it's out of order? Maybe it's exactly the right order. In other words, you remove the ladle and the coal pans from the Kodesh HaKadoshim in the big day Lavan in the white clothing, and then you'll go ahead and you'll bring the aisle for the Kohen Gadol and to be mechaper for the Kohen Gadol and the people with the big day Zav. And maybe it's exactly the way the Torah puts it down. So Rav Chisda Gemiri, we have a tradition that Chamesh Tevilos v'Asara Kedushin Tavu Kohen Gadol u'Mekadesh by the Yom. The Kohen Gadol did 5 mikvahs and 10 sanctifications of his hands and his feet on Yom Kippur. The Ik is syndrome, but if the psukim were exactly the way it is, that in fact the removal of the ladle from the Kodesh HaKadoshim took place before the bringing of the aisle of the Kohen Gadol and the people. You would only find 3 mikvahs and 6 washing of the hands, because if everything was done in order, then you would have less changings of clothing. If you have less changings of clothing, by definition, you have less going to the mikveh and washing of the hands. So you would end up with only 3 and 6, because you would get 3 mikvahs, because it would be only 3 changes of clothing. And for every change of clothing, you wash the hands before you change and after you change. So you would end up with 6, because you'd be missing 2 more changes of clothing, i.e. leaving the Kodesh HaKadoshim and then later on going back into the Kodesh HaKadoshim and coming back out. So, therefore, Al Karchov, since we have a tradition that there was 5 and 10, 5 mikvahs and 10 washing of the hands, there had to have been a service that was out of order from the order in which the Torah puts it in. And what was that? The removal of the pans. The removal of the pans when they cooled off in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, you went back for them. You didn't just wait for them to cool off. We are now on 32.8.2. This, in fact, what we just learned is probably the hardest part of today's Gemara. Says the Gemara, Tanya, we learned. From where do we know that we have 5 immersions and 10 sanctifications? How do we know we have 5 mikvahs and 10 times they wash their hands and their feet? That the Kohen Gadol was table that he did on that day on Yom Kippur. Talmud Laima, Aaron as big day Habad. Aaron shall come to the oil moed and remove the linen vestments for rochas espesare b'mayim, and he shall wash his flesh in water. The makom kadosh in a holy place. The lovers is begodav, and he shall put on his clothes. The yotza v'yos should go out and perform. All about it with so much detail. Shekol amishana me'avodah la'avodah. And anyone who changes from one type of avodah to the other avodah, meaning inside to outside, from inside the Heichel to the Azara, Toyin Tefillah needs to be toivel, needs to wash. Amar Rebbe. How do I know about 5 mikvahs and 10 washing of the hands of the feet? That the Kohen Gadol did on Yom Kippur. Shenema, different pasuk. Kesoines bas kodesh yilbash. It's a sacred linen tunic he shall don. Umichtan seibad yira b'sarai, and the breeches shall be on his flesh. Ube'avnei bad yakzan, a linen sash he shall gird himself. Ube'tsnepes bad yitznep, and a linen hat he shall put on his head. Big day kodesh, they are holy vestments. Berochatz b'mayim es b'sarai, he shall wash his flesh in the water. Be'ulevesham, and he shall don them. The last word levesham is obviously extra. Whoever changes from one avodah to another avodah requires the mikvah. Big day kodesh. It says they are all kodesh. All the vestments are compared one with the other. So it doesn't matter which way you're switching. And the Gemara is going to say what exactly, a little later, the Gemara is going to go into what is this Gemara coming to tell me extra, the last line. Obviously, that's exactly what the pasuk is telling us, that in every change of begotten, whether from the white begotten, the big day Lavan to the big day Zav, or from the big day Zav to the big day Lavan, the gold to the linen to the gold, you've got to do a tefillah and wash your hands. So what is it, these last words, coming to add to the discussion? The Gemara is going to get into it. Now the Gemara goes further. And there were 5 distinct avodas. Tamid shel shachar, the big days of. We said this before. The morning tamid, the tamid shel baika, which is done all year long. So of course the Kohen Gadol did it in his all year long begadim, i.e. the 8 begadim, the big days of. Avodas hayoim, the big day love. The special avodah of the day on Yom Kippur were done in the white vestments, only in the 4 begadim, totally white, totally made out of linen. Eloi ve'eloam, his ram and the ram for the people to be mechaper the big days of, back in the golden vestments, because they were brought back in the Azara. Eloi ve'eloam, the big days of, we just said that. Then kaf umachta the big day love, the removal of the ladle and the kolim pan from the kodesh hakadoshim back into the white vestments. And then he ends the day with the carbon shalbeno abayim, the afternoon tamid, which he opens in the gold vestment. So now, says the Gemara, called tefillah tzarich shtei conditions. How do I know that after every immersion we've got 2 sanctifications of the hands before you went to the mikvah and after you went to the mikvah? Talmud loima, ufashat v'rochatz v'lovash. He shall remove, he shall wash, he shall don. Rabbi Elazar ben Reb Shimon says, and let's remember this because we're going to refer back to this Rabbi Elazar ben Reb Shimon shortly. Rabbi Elazar ben Reb Shimon oimer, kal v'chayma. We can make it a kal v'chayma. In a place where you're not minat Torah required to do mikvah, which means all year long. Tune and kiddush, nonetheless, minat Torah, you have to wash your hands, because if you take a look at the second to last line of Rashi on the page, it says, "Bevoyom el oyel moyed v'kratam al mizbeach yechatzu." When you come into the oil moyed next to the mizbeach yechatzu, you shall wash your hands, i.e., in the kiyar. In the kiyar, they washed their hands, and we're coming into the Beis Hamikdash, in the holy kiyar. They were mekadosh their hands and their feet. So he's saying just all year long. They were not required to go to the mikvah, but they were absolutely required to be mekadosh their hands and their feet. Is a bizarre malkim setorim tefillah. In a case where biblically, which is on Yom Kippur, that the Kohen Gadol on every change of his clothing needed to use the mikvah. It's not a question that, of course, he certainly needs to be mekadosh his hands and his feet in the kiyar. And now the Gemara says, but if you will say just like the rest of the year, one kiddushin, one sanctification is sufficient. In other words, when they came into the Beis Hamikdash in the morning, they went to the kiyar and they washed their hands and their feet, and that was it. So I would then say, Afkan kiddush echad, so to on Yom Kippur. All I have to do is after each mikvah or before each mikvah, wash my hands and feet once in the kiyar, and that will be enough. Who said I need proof? Talmud loima uba aaron eloil moyed uba sheres bigdei abara shelovash. And Aaron shall come to the oil moyed and remove the linen vestments that he had worn. Ma Talmud loima ashalovash. The pasuk says uba aaron eloil moyed uba sheres bigdei abad, and he shall remove the clothing ashalovash that he wore. Says the Gemara, Ma Talmud loima ashalovash. Obviously, Klum Adam Poishet Elamash Labash. Can a person take off clothing except that, of course, that he was wearing? So the words Ashalabash are extra. Ella Lahakish Pishita Lilavisha. The extra words Ashalabash are coming to compare the removing with the donning. So taking off of the clothing with putting on the clothing. And now we're on 32.8.3. 32.8.3. Ma levisha to in kiddush, just like putting on the vestments, requires sanctification, right? Which we learned before. Apishita to in kiddush. So to be taking off requires sanctification. Very good. Excellent Kavachayim. Says the Gemara. Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says, we said this before. Talmud Leiber Arna Loyal Moye Baruchas is beside Bamayim B'Mokim Kodesh. All the matter, with all the detail that's in this pasuk. Whoever switches clothes, switches from one to another, from inside and outside, from inside the Kodesh Kedoshim and the Heichel to the Azara, and from the Azara back into the Heichel, to in Tefillah needs immersion, needs to go to the mikvah. Ask the big day love and the big day zah. That's great. We find from this pasuk when you're switching from the white vestments to the gold vestments. So that's fine when you were switching from the white vestments because you're in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. When you went back out and you put on the gold vestments, you needed the tefillah. The big day zav, the big day love. I mean, how do I know the opposite direction? Did you also require the mikvah? And now we're on Amid Beis. Lamed Beis, Amid Beis. Tana de Bey, Rabbi Yishmael. So for this, we learned in the yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael. Kal v'chaim, I've got a kal v'chaim. Uma big day zok. The gold investment. She'ein bey, she'ein kain nichtes behem l'fnai l'fnim. Which no kain gadol is allowed to go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim with the gold vestments because en katega nasa sanega prosecuted. A defendant doesn't become a prosecutor. We don't want to remind everybody about the egel azov, the golden calf. So big days off. That the kohen gadol is not into the holy of holies, the Kodesh HaKadoshim with the gold vestments. Torah tefillah still requires immersion. Big day love on than the white vestments. That which you do go into the holy of holies. So obviously the white clothing on Yom Kippur have a higher sanctification. And I did shitoin tefillah which should require immersion. Says the Gemara, that's not a great kavachayim because ikal mifrach we can slug it up. Mal a big days off. Shekaim kapara miruba. Why you could say the gold investments are special because they have additional kapara. Additional, they achieve atonement much more frequently. Why? Because the kohen gadol wears the gold investments all year long. 363 days a year, he uses it to achieve atonement. Well, in that case, if that's the fact, in overall, it is a holier investment than the other one. Says the Gemara, you're right. It's a pretty good cover. That's a pretty good refutation of the Kalva. So, and after the Rebbe, we're going to go to Rebbe. That Rebbe who learned it out from Kasainis Bas Kodesh Shilbats Varachitz B'Mayim Etz B'Sari Levesham. That over there, that you got to change with every, you got to toggle with every change of the big God. Give me 1 second. Sorry. Give me 1 second, Jerry. I'll be right back. Okay. So goes further. Omer Rebbe says, Rebbe, Minai in the Chumash Tefillah, sorry, Kedushin. How do I know that on your Kippur I've got 5 mikvahs and 10 washing of the hands and the feet? Tribal Kohen Gadol Mekadosh by B'yoyim. Talmud Loima, the pasuk that we just said, Kesaynis Bas Kodesh Yilbash. Anybody who changes from one service to another should do in Tefillah. So says the Gemara, Ashkechad big day Zav, the big day Lava. Now I found, okay, you need the mikvah and to be mekadosh the hands. When you change from the gold vestments, the big day zav to the big day lavan, to the white vestment. Big day lavan, the big day zav, binayin. How do I know when I switch from the white to the gold that I need the mikvah to be mekadosh the hands? Because in fact, if you assume that the white ones came out of the Kodesh HaKadoshim and the gold ones are only used outside the Kodesh HaKadoshim, they're not as holy. Maybe I don't need it. Says the Gemara, Ton Debei Rabbi Yishmael, Kal V'Chayim. I've got a Kal V'Chayim. Ma Bigdei Loban. Ma Bigdei Loban. She'en Kaparosa Meruba. The white ones, whose achievement of atonement are not very. It's only done on Yom Kippur. Tun and Tefillah, they saw Shekapara Meruba, whose achievement of atonement is varied because a whole year the Kohen Gadol could achieve kapara in those begodim. And a din Tun and Tefillah. Is it not logical that it should require immersion? Says the Gemara, no. But the fact of the matter is that the white vestments are unbelievably special because it's only in those clothing that you can go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim once a year. So says the Gemara, that's why Rebbe teaches the pasuk b'Omer, Big Day Kodesh Shem Berachas Es Besarai Berachas B'Mayim Es Besarai Uleveisham. The extra words Leveisham and the extra words, the sacred word. It says Big Day Kodesh, the holy begodim, teaches us Big Day Kodesh is a Lashon Rabin. It is expansive. It's not singular. It's an expansive Lashon, meaning more than one. Big day. Not Beged Kodesh, Big Day Kodesh. That teaches us that whenever you switch, whether from white to gold or gold to white, you need the mikveh to be mekadosh the heads. Says the Gemara, Chamesh Avodas, and there are 5 distinct avodas. Chamesh Shachar, Big Days of Avodas Hayoy. Big Day Lava, and we're just going through this because we just learned this. Big Days of Big Day Lava. Back when you go remove the ladle and the gold pan from the Holy of Holies from the Kodesh HaKadoshim, back to the white vestments because obviously it's taking place to remove it from the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Big Days of. And how do I know that every immersion requires 2 sanctifications of the hand of the feet before and afterwards? Shall remove, he shall wash, he shall wash, he shall dye. So now says the Gemara, wait a minute. Hi the pasuk just simply says velovash, meaning go into the mikvah. Where do you see anything about sanctifying the hands and the feet? You're just making an assumption that there's an immediate connection between the mikvah and washing your hands. Who said? We all know that unless you're Hasidish, you're not running to the mikveh every morning, but every morning you wash your hands. There's no two comparisons. So now we're on 32b2. 32b2. We're getting down the orbit. Says the Gemara, if I don't need in this pasuk, the pasuk to teach me that, so what it called the berachats in this pasuk to teach me that about the mikvah, the nafkalam in Big Day Kodesh, because I learned it out of the other pasuk, but Big Day Kodesh, the holy vestments that are from that pasuk, that every change of clothing requires the mikvah. So over here it's open. In the kiddush. Well, since I don't need it for the mikvah, then every time I change my clothes, I got a mikvah because I already have a pasuk for it. So now I could say this pasuk is only dealing with washing the hands and the feet. So says the Gemara, so let the Torah write it out straight out. Why let it use the word kiddush? Why is it using the word berachats, which has to do with the mikvah? Why is the Torah looking to confuse us? Let the Torah write it out straight out. The kiddush. So I'll know it's talking about the hands and the feet, and it's not talking about washing the whole body. Says the Gemara, the tefillah b'kiddush. That the Torah is coming to teach us that doing the mikvah is like being mekadesh in the following ways. Ma kiddush b'moken kadosh, just like the sanctification of the hands and the feet have to do in a holy place, i.e., with the kiyar. With the watering in the watering the sink as it was, the well that was in the Azara next to the Mizbeah. So just like the washing in the hands and the feet had to be done in the Azara proper, in the holy proper, After tefillah b'makom kodesh. So the tefillah has to be b'makom kodesh, which we said before, has to be done in the Shar Hamayim, which is built into the walls facing into the Azara, and the mikveh there was in the Azara proper, as opposed to the Beis HaPravda, where the mikveh was on the roof and wasn't holy at all. Rabbi Yehuda Kiddush Minolan, and according to Rabbi Yehuda, how does he learn the laws of sanctification? If the pasuk over there, according to Rabbi Yehuda, is using the psukim differently, so he doesn't have an open pasuk to teach me that Berochatz has anything to do with Kiddush. So he says, Nafkalot to Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Shimon. He learns it out from Elazar ben Rabbi Shimon, who said before, all year long, you don't require using the mikvah. In Kiddush, biblically, you're supposed to wash your hands and feet in the kiyar. On Yom Kippur, when you are biblically required to use the mikvah, in Kiddush, it's not a question that you should require Kiddush. And as we learned a couple of days ago, a kal v'chayma is considered a diaraisa dikadin. A kal v'chayma is considered a biblical halacha. Rav Chisda says, Rav Chisda, Ha b'Rebbe, mafka mi Rebbe Meir, mafka mi Rabbana. This that Rebbe learned is different than Rebbe Meir, and it's different than the Rebbe. Mafka mi the Rebbe Rabbanon, it's different than the Rabbanon. The ilu Rabbanon ami kishuhu lobish mekadesh. The Rabbanon hold that when the Kohen Gadol sanctifies himself both times, when he washes his hands and his feet, when he is dressed. The Yoma and Rebbe says that he sanctifies himself when he is undressed, when he takes off the old clothes, okay, and when, of course, when he puts on the new clothes. But he does, one of them is clearly when he's undressed, according to Rebbe. The Rameya Omer Hach Kiddush Basa Kashu Lobish Mekadesh, because Rameya says that the Kohen Gadol performs at least the last washing of the hands and the feet when he's dressed. Rebbe says that no, he sanctifies himself both times when he's undressed, when he takes off the other clothes, his holy clothes, and then when he takes off as well the clothes to go into the big day chol, his weekday clothing at the end, he goes ahead and he washes his hands as well. Great, or the number 16, if you look, they explain the Rashi. There's, even though Reb Meir agrees that the first sanctification is performed after the Kohen Gadol has removed his used vestments, he nevertheless holds that the second sanctification is performed after the Kohen Gadol has donned the new vestments. Amar Rav Acha by Yitzchak, Hakol Moedim, even Rebbe is Moedah, B'Kiddush Sheni, regarding the second sanctification, Shalovish v'Achikach Mekadesh, that the Kohen Gadol puts on the new begodim, whichever, either the gold begodim or the white begodim, and afterwards washes his hands and his feet. My Tama the Amakra, Oy begishtam el hamizbeach, or when they approach the mizbeach. Mi she'ena mechusa elikisha. This applies one who's only lacks approaching the mizbeach is fit to sanctify his hands and his feet. Yatzazeh shemechusa levisha v'gisha. Excluded from this is somebody who lacks both putting on the right clothes, the correct big day kodesh, and approaching the mizbeach. Therefore, he says first he puts on the big day kodesh. Now he's capable of approaching the mizbeach. So now he washes his hands and his feet. Very good. We're on 32b3. Amalei Rav Acha b'nei Derai Derabel Rav Ashi Loi Rav Chisda Islay Rav Acha. Rav Chisda, who said that according to Rebbe HaKadosh, that the Kohen Gadol has to sanctify it both times when he's undressed. Okay, because as he shall remove and he shall wash. So he explains the thing that means between the removal of the old and the putting on the new one. So he washes his hands twice. Clearly does not agree with the review of Rav Acha bar Yaakov, who said that he puts it on, even according to, he says that according to Rebbe, that certainly even the last one, even when he washes his hands after he puts on the vestments. The Lord Rav Achi, so the Rav Chisda, Rav Achi clearly does not hold like Rav Chisda, who holds that the Kohen Gadol must sanctify his hands both times while undressed. Im Kain, the Rebbe Habilei, Mechasi Kedushin, then Rebbe would have a total of 15 sanctifications, not 10, because you would have additional, if you have to wash and when you're undressed, and you have to wash when you're dressed on the same set of clothing, you obviously would add, since there are 5 changes of clothing, by definition, you would be adding an extra 5 at washings of the hands and the feet, which means you would end up with 15. But we have a tradition that there is only 10 sanctifications of the hands and the feet. Says the Gemara of Mishnah Vaita, the Mishnah says that they brought in the Tamid of the morning. The Kohen Gadol made the first slice, but he didn't finish making the shechita. Then he ran and he grabbed the klei asharis, a holy vessel, and he quickly was mekabel, and he accepted the blood that was coming out while another kohen finished the shechita. Says the Gemara, my kiratzai. What does it mean, kiratzai? Ama'ula lishta de katalahu. It's a lashon of killing. It means that the kohen gadol has to slaughter the tamid. He just doesn't finish the shechita. Amar Rav Nachman by Yitzchak, my kra. What's the pasuk? Because the pasuk says, Egla yefei pia mitzrayim keretz mitzavayin ba ba. Mitzrayim is a very fair heifer, but a keretz from the north is surely coming. In other words, Babel was going to come, the Nebuchadnezzar was going to come and take over Egypt. My mashma, where's this pasuk? What is this pasuk? Where do you see the proof? Rabbi Yosef, as Rabbi Yosef explained, Malki Yoeh have in Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim was a fair kingdom. Amamin Katoilin Mitzipuna Yoseh Allah, but a murderous people from the north came upon it, i.e. Bavel. Yirmiyah was prophesying that Bavel was going to come and conquer Mitzrayim. Kartzai b'tamah. How much of the pipe does the Kohen Gadol need to kill the tamid? The majority of both pipes, the esophagus and the breathing pipe. The majority of the 2 pipes. And the fact that we had taught in the first part of the mission that speaks about shechting, slaughtering a regular chulin livestock. It says over there in that Mishnah, the Mishnah is in chulin, cutting the greater part of one pipe is like cutting the entire pipe. Lama sheninu. Why does that Mishnah then repeat itself and say, Roiv echad ba'oiv, Roiv shnayim b'behema? If one severed the greater part of one pipe in a bird and the greater part of both pipes in an animal, the shechita is a kosher shechita. It's coming to teach us. They brought the tamid to the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. He slit its throat, and another Kohen comes and completes the avodah of the shechita. And the Kohen Gadol runs the kibul es adam b'zarkai, and he has to accept the blood and throw it. Yochal, I might have thought, loy merakike apostle. I might have thought that if another Kohen does not come to complete the offering, he doesn't finish the shechita. Okay, it would be no good. Kamashmal on that, no, the shechita is good if a majority of the 2 pipes are cut, even if you do not go and somebody else doesn't go and complete the slaughter. And why are we doing this with the Kohen Gadol? Because the Kohen Gadol is the only one that's allowed to do the avodah, the service of Yom Kippur. So the Kabbalah, the Halicha, and the Zrika must be done by the Kohen Gadol. So says the Gemara, I might have thought 32b4 that if another Kohen Gadol does not complete the Kohen Gadol slaughter on Yom Kippur, the offer would be invalid. I would have such a thought. Why would I have such a thought? In Cain, because if you're going to say that such a thought could exist, that if the Kohen Gadol doesn't complete the Shechita and another Kohen doesn't come and complete it for him, what do you call it? That it would be no good? In Cain, but then it would be, if that's the case, then I'm required to have another Kohen come and finish the Shechita on Yom Kippur. But Tanya, we learned all of the Yom Kippur services are only valid when done by the Kohen Gadol. So if I'm absolutely required to have a second Kohen complete the Shechita while the Kohen Gadol is running to get a clay sharis to accept the blood, so somebody else has to complete the Shechita. If that's true, that the other person is absolutely vital. If he's absolutely vital, it turns out that a regular Kohen is doing an Avodah on Yom Kippur. And if he's doing an Avodah on Yom Kippur, that goes against what we learned, that none of the Avodas on Yom Kippur are kosher unless it's done by the Kohen Gadol. So Hachikama, this is what Reish Lakish is coming to tell us. You're right. If you're going to tell me, the truth is, if another Kohen do not complete the Kohen Gadol's Shechita, it would be good biblically, but I might have thought that rabbinically it's no good. We're now on tomorrow's daf, Lamed Gimel Lamed Aleph. Lakach Shaninu, to say that this is absolutely not the case, there's no Derabanan. The Mishnah comes and repeats itself. Roiv Echad Ba'oiv. If you slaughter the greater part of one pipe in a bird, roiv up to two pipes in an animal, it's perfectly valid to tell us, even rabbinically, it's perfectly valid. So now that you're telling me there is no even a rabbinical invalidation, why do I need another Kohen to complete the Kohen Gadol slaughter? I don't need it. In other words, let the Kohen Gadol cut the majority of the two pipes, run and get the clay sharis and accept the blood and keep going. Why do I need to call in another Kohen to complete the job when lahalacha the job is complete? The shechita is kosher with the cutting of the majority of the food pipe and the majority of the ear pipe. Says the Gemara, mitzvah lemerek, because there's a separate Mishnah to complete the slaughter so that the animal's blood will pour out freely. There's two Yesodis over here. Obviously, the Damachai, and this is where we're stopping. The Damachai is the spurting blood. That comes out when you originally immediately do the shechting. The second reason is Tsar Balachai. The whole idea of the Shechita is that in many ways it is the most humane way to slaughter an animal. It's not, as Jerry, you can talk about this better than most, it is not a clean, easy job slaughtering a big animal for sure, especially when they figure out what's going on. The fastest way to kill is by cutting quickly through the two pipes. That does it. It severs it. We want to completely sever it as much as possible. The truth is, you know how we know this? In the Arba Misas Bezdin, one of the 4 deaths in Bezdin is chenek, which is beheading. Except it's not beheading. We have a picture in our heads, because we've all watched movies and we've seen it, that the guy puts his head down on a block and the axeman takes the axe, and the lahavdul goes ahead and chops up the person's head from the back of his neck forward, right? We all have that picture. In fact, that is not the Jewish way. The Jewish way is you slit the throat. Chenek is not beheading. Chenek is simply doing a shechita on a person. That's the atonement. The atonement is doing a shechita on a person. This is similar, of course, to skila. When we talk about throwing stones at a person, we all have a picture. The guy stands there and you throw stones at him like you would throw tomatoes until he dies. In fact, that is not the case. You take him to the rockiest cliff that you can find. You throw him down on the rocks so that he dies immediately, and then you stone him. So you're stoning by mostly a dead person. The same thing with hanging. The halacha is you hang a person and you immediately have to take him down. None of this thing like we see in the cowboy movies where they hang him and he's hanging over there on the tree. No such thing. He comes down immediately. And we actually call this v'ahavta l'reyacha kamoicha. You should love your friend like yourself. He was chayiv misa, but now he's your reyacha. He got his tshuva. Now he's reyacha. Take care of him. So over here, the mitzvah l'merachek is a mitzvah to complete the slaughter. Number one, that the blood should come out quickly. Number